Hey y'all, it's DIY Alex, and in today's video, I'm going to teach you how to find the best cut setting for any material that you can cut with your Cricut while wasting as little material as possible. This could be vinyl, heat transfer vinyl, printable vinyl, sticker paper, literally anything that you can cut with your Cricut machine. And I'm going to teach you how to do that through the process of test cuts. Test cuts are always a good idea, especially when you're cutting a material for the first time, or if you're cutting a material for the first time in a long time. And that's because cut settings can change for a variety of reasons. Maybe your mat isn't as sticky as it was last time, or your blade isn't as new as the last time you cut that material. Or even Cricut Design Space could make an update and you need to use a different cut setting for a material that you've cut a bunch of times before. So let's jump into this video so I can teach you the best way to do a test cut. To get started with your test cut, of course, we're going to start here in the Cricut Design Space canvas. And the first thing we're going to do is go to the left-hand side of the screen and find the Basic Shapes panel. You're going to open up the Basic Shapes panel and insert a star. The reason that I like to use a star shape for my test cuts is because it has a few points to it. So I figure that if my cut setting can cut these nice sharp points and everything comes out crisp, then it's probably a good cut setting. So then you're going to keep your star selected and we need to resize it to 1 inch wide. So I'm going to go over to my width and change this to 1 and then press enter. I don't like to make it any smaller than this because I want to make sure that my Cricut can cut it without going too intricate, but I also don't want to waste a lot of material. So I found that a 1 inch size star is the perfect shape and size to test out a cut setting. Now you can do this with just a star on your canvas and nothing else. Or if you're working on another project, you can simply add a star to your canvas. And as long as it's on a mat all by itself, you can do the test cut kind of in the middle of another project as well. So just ensure that you have a star on your canvas, and then you're going to go over to the green Make It button to proceed through your project. And like I said, if you have another project going, make sure that the star is on a mat all by itself. Then I'm going to change this mat to just be a 12 by 12 inch mat because there's no reason for it to be 12 by 24 inches, and then I'm going to click continue. Then once your Cricut is connected, next we're going to choose the cut setting that we think will work for this material. But I do want you to keep in mind that the cut settings that your Cricut already has programmed into it are based on Cricut brand materials. So even though something has a name that makes it seem like it's close to the material, it might not be the cut setting you actually need. But that's exactly why test cuts are really important. So I'm going to be cutting some holographic vinyl. So I'm going to click on the green Browse All Materials button, and I'm going to look for a holographic vinyl setting. So let's start with this one right here that's just called holographic vinyl, and then choose done. Now that we have that cut setting selected, let's hop over to my Cricut machine and I'll show you how to do the first round of cuts. So then you're just going to stick your material onto the appropriate Cricut mat and insert that mat into your Cricut machine. Okay, so now we need to evaluate our test cut. So we're gonna unload the material from our mat and we're gonna check and see how our Cricut cut that star using our weeding tool. So I'm just gonna lift up the corner of this design. And it actually looks like it may have cut pretty well. So what I like to do is not only lift up the corner, but I like to peel off the whole thing. And we want to see if there are any jagged edges or anything. So once we've peeled out our star and we can see that it cut really nicely, there's one more step that we need to take, and that's that we need to check the backing underneath our vinyl. Now, of course, if you're cutting something like HTV, you may not necessarily have a backing, but it is helpful to see behind your material what it looks like because we need to determine how deep the blade actually went. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna take my weeding tool and kind of peel up the corner of my material like this. And we want to take a look into our backing because we're trying to figure out if there's any kind of indentation into our backing. So this probably goes without saying, but if your material cut all the way through down to the mat, that means you had too much pressure. If it didn't cut all the way through the material, or if you're left with jagged edges, then you know that you didn't quite have enough pressure and you do need to adjust your cut setting. But it's easier to evaluate that on something like vinyl because we can see if we had any indentions or anything like that. But this is actually a perfect example because there's no indentions on our white backing of a kiss cut. So when you're cutting vinyl and HTV, you're looking for a kiss cut, which means that you want your machine to perfectly cut out that first layer, but you don't want any kind of indentation into your backing, because if you have any indentation in your backing, that means that you're cutting too deep, and that can actually make it really hard to weed your material depending on what you're making and exactly what you're cutting. So the goal is to find the cut setting that's going to give you a kiss cut. So in this example, we could go with the holographic vinyl cut setting and say that everything's great. But if you need to adjust your cut setting so that you either have more pressure or less pressure, let's go back into Cricut Design Space and I'll show you what to do if you need to continue testing. Hey, real quick, if you want to go from a Cricut beginner to a confident Cricut crafter, then you have to check out my course, Cricut Chemistry. I took my very best Cricut tips, tricks, and techniques and packaged them all into an online course so that you can learn in just a few weeks what it took me 7 years to learn. So if you want to learn more, you can find it over on my website, DIYAlex.com, or linked down in the description below. All right, back to this video. So the first thing you need to do on your second round of test cuts is to go underneath your mat and click on edit. And then you can see your star is over here in the corner. And we're just going to drag that star out to about 1.5 inches. So that way we are wasting as little material as possible when we are making our next test cut. Then to keep that star in place, we're going to go down to the bottom of our screen here and click this green button that says done. Next, we need to figure out what setting we are going to use. And the first option that you have is to go back to your cut setting, which mine has already released, but every single cut setting has this pressure default menu where you can choose either more pressure or less pressure. But I do want to let you know that the more and less pressure settings don't change the pressure very much at all. So if your cut setting is very, very close, then maybe you want to either try more pressure to cut deeper into the material or less pressure to cut less, more shallow into the material. But for the most part, I do recommend that you choose another cut setting to try. So let me show you how to do that, especially if you have no idea what to try next. So you're going to go back to your list of cut settings and you're going to click the green Browse All Materials button once again. And then I want you to go in the bottom right-hand corner and click on the green Material Settings button. And that's actually going to open up all of the materials that are compatible with whatever machine you have selected, along with their cut pressure. Now, this cut pressure is actually made up by Cricut, so it doesn't follow any particular unit or type of pressure such as PSI, like a lot of times you would know in like your car tires to measure your pressure. These numbers are made up by Cricut. But the way that you can figure out what to do next is you want to go down this list, and it's in alphabetical order, and find what you tried first. So we used holographic vinyl. So I'm going to go to the H's, and we can see that we had a pressure of 110. So if I was going to try to find something that had less pressure, I would try to find something about 10 pressure points below that. So I would try something that had a cut pressure of approximately 100. Or if I wanted to do another step deeper or further into my material, then I would try to find a cut setting that had a cut pressure of like 120 or so. It doesn't have to be exact, but that's just where I would start if I were you. Now, I'm not going to go super deep into these pressure settings, but I do have a video that teaches you all about it. So I will link it up here in the corner of the screen if you want to learn more about Cricut's cut pressure settings. So I'm going to go ahead and cheat the system a little bit. I'm not going to go by the cut pressures because my secret weapon for cut settings when I'm not sure what to do, especially when I'm working with things that have a holographic film on them, like the holographic vinyl I'm using, is the light cardstock cut setting. The light cardstock cut setting works for so many different things, so if you have no idea what else to try, feel free to try the light cardstock cut setting. So once I have light cardstock chosen as my next cut setting to try, let's go back over to my Cricut and I'll show you how to test it again. So now that I have another cut setting chosen, I'm just going to load my mat back into my Cricut machine again. and see how this cut setting works. So now we can go ahead and unload our mat, and we're just gonna follow the same process of checking out that cut. So I'm gonna take my weeding tool and see how it comes off of my mat. So that came off really, really well. All of my corners and lines and everything are clean. So now let's lift up our weeding tool and check out the backing. So it's probably pretty tough to tell on camera, but I can see that there are some indents left over in my backing. So that means that it would be better to go with the first cut setting that I used, the holographic vinyl, because the light cardstock had just a little bit too much pressure for this vinyl. But what you would do is the exact same process. You would evaluate whether you have just the right amount of pressure, too much or not enough. And then you would either note the correct cut setting that you found for your machine. I recommend writing it down because it can get a little bit confusing if you're testing these all the time. Or you can return to Cricut Design Space and follow all the same steps that we just did to test another cut setting. You would move your star over 1 more inch, try another cut setting, and then evaluate how it cuts. So that's the process of test cuts. If you learned something in this video, then make sure to comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to DIY Alex for more free content just like this. If you don't want to wait for the next video, then make sure to find me on your favorite social media platforms. All my links are down in the description. All the hearts.